Now is probably the right time to introduce, let's say, the main character in Being in Time. It's a term that we've already encountered. It's a very ordinary term in German, but starting from now on, it's going to acquire a technical meaning in Heidegger. And so we're going to see it mostly untranslated into English, both in conversations about Heidegger, but also in the two main translations, the McCoy-Robinson and the Stambaugh translation. And that's this word Dasein. So from now on, as we talk about the ontic and the ontological priority of being, we're not just going to be talking about the ontic and ontological priority of being, but the ontic and ontological priority of Dasein. Well, what is Dasein? Well, in its ordinary usage, it's just a word for existence. You might remember that I had said that the German title of Being in Time is Sein und Zeit, which is like to be in time. Sein means to be. Dasein is a compound term formed from Sein. German does this a lot. It does this even more than English, where you can add additional words, additional prepositions, etc., to words that already exist in order to form longer compound words. Now, sometimes these can be very technical, but in this case, it's forming into what's a very ordinary German word. So da, which is a German word, again, a very, very ordinary word that just means there, and sein is to be. So literally, it would be transliterated as something like to be there, or being there. There's a Peter Sellers movie with that title from the 70s. We won't get into that here. But like I said, in ordinary German, it mostly means existence. It doesn't necessarily mean human existence, but that's how you'll often see people talk about it in Heidegger. That's also, I think, going to be a little misleading. So I want to point out I want to sort of briefly explain what it is and then point out a few difficulties in either translating it or leaving it untranslated. So I've said that it's a little misleading to call it human being, although that's more correct. Maybe even more correct would be calling it what it means to be human. Or let's say more broadly, what it means to be the kind of being that asks questions. Or, notice the word being there, what it means to be the kind of being that could have a there. Think of Gertrude Stein's complaint about Oakland, that there's no there. What does it mean to be the kind of being that can have a place or a there or a location? Now, this is actually related back to this notion of questioning that I've been mentioning is guiding Being in Time from the beginning. So remember that we're coming into this quote-unquote ontic priority of the question of being from this chapter on the ontological priority. Ontology has to do with science, formal philosophy, etc., how we ask about meaning. And Heidegger's simply going to point out that that's couched in our very ordinary human activity of wondering about things in general, of, let's say, taking things to be meaningful, which we can do in sort of cognitive ways, but we actually do in emotional ways, we do in practical ways. Arguably, and this is why it's going to be this core term for Heidegger, it's the fundamental thing that human beings do. Now, that doesn't mean that human beings are the only beings that do it. There's actually going to be a lot of discourse in sort of later Heidegger studies about animals and Dasein, etc. And although philosophy has often been very anthropocentric and only focused on human beings, there's nothing in Heidegger's account that rules out the possibility that other beings, other kinds of things, could also have theirs. Right? There'll be a famous passage in Heidegger where he'll say that the human being has a world, rocks are worldless, and then people give a lot of complaints for this. He'll say that animals are world poor. I'm not going to get into that, but let's notice that it doesn't mean that they don't have worlds. Right? There's something about this phenomenon of having a there that Heidegger is not going to say is exclusive to humans, but does seem to define what we are, and seems to define especially how it is that we can do something like ontology. So when we get into the ontic priority of being, this is going to be the main focus. So that's why I say it's kind of like the human being, but it's more like what it means to be the kinds of things that for whom things can be meaningful, for whom things can, let's say, matter. One last thing to notice, and then I'm gonna do a short sort of bonus video where we're going to talk about a poem. That'll be a lot of fun for everyone, I'm sure. So we're going to leave this term Dasein untranslated, and largely, like I said, that's because it's a technical term. That's going to have one disadvantage. This ability to form a compound word in German from the da and sein allows Heidegger and allows you to sort of use it either as a compound or to use it in a lot of constructions. So you could have it like something ist da would mean blah, blah, blah is there. You could also change it from Dasein to something like hier sein, being here, or mit sein, being with. You could do this with pretty much any word, right? And Heidegger's going to play a lot with this. So there's going to be all this playing around this idea of Dasein that we're just going to miss. And I'm just going to have to point it out in certain cases. But it's worth noticing that this is a possibility that's built into the way that he's using this term. And it's going to come back in different forms. So I'm going to try to give an example of that in the next video, where we're going to talk about, and this is very exciting, of course, a poem that is almost certainly explicitly riffing on Heidegger. So all poems should do.